They say in politics, sometimes when you launch a policy, you know you're doing the right thing when you, well, anger the wrong people. And of course, Rachel Reeves yesterday laid out her idea. And I think it can be summed up quite simply. If the Conservatives refuse to build, then we will build, or we will have to build. And what she laid out yesterday was some, I think, very, very interesting stuff indeed. And bizarrely, Simon Jenkins has come out and said, and rubbished it all and said, this is just a complete gift and takeaway to the developers. So we're going to go over a guy called Robert Colvile. And he is someone who is part of a think tank, part of the, the Center for Policy and Center for Policy Studies. That's it. Relatively an okay think tank. He's quite an all right writer, but I think it's good to have a look into what he has said in response to Simon Jenkins. I think this is someone who points out quite rightly that Simon Jenkins getting a lot of this stuff wrong on housing and development, and what Rachel Reeves is pretty good. You know, I think there will be a lot of people who will say it doesn't go far enough, but to be honest, as a starter for 10, it's pretty good. I'm pretty pleased with what she said yesterday, especially due to the fact that she's been endorsed by Mark Carney, the current governor of the Bank of England. Remember, this was the guy who Jeremy Hunt chased halfway around the world in order to become the chairman of the Bank of England. So bear that in mind, because there's a lot of people really annoyed that he's given her an endorsement. But if anything, it's probably the best endorsement she could possibly ask for. And the fact that she has constantly said, I want to be seen certainly someone who will be fiscally responsible. You can't get a better endorsement for someone who is sort of fiscally responsible than from the governor of the Bank of England. So we're going to go into this because, again, I think it's a really fascinating thing to look at on social media. Like I say, go follow this guy. I think he does very, very good stuff. He does his own writing as well on sort of another website. So go follow him. He's very, very good. Robert Colvile, go check him out. He's very good. But anyway, we're going to have a look at his tweets that he did on this. So Robert Colvile starts. There are two things that are truly infinite: the universe and the errors and hypocrisy of Simon Jenkins when writing about housing and planning. Yes, he's done another column. Let's dive in. As you can see, there's Simon Jenkins' column that he's wrote called Labour's Plan for the Builders, Not the Blockers, is a capitulation to developers. So let's start. Robert fires back. Okay, first paragraph. The idea of compensating people for disturbance to their surroundings is dismissed as the most bizarre planning bribe in history. When Octopus Energy launched its fan club to do exactly this, it got over 20,000 plus bids for local wind turbines. And he's right. Colvile is right. When Octopus Energy did that, they got massively funded, because now all these people will go, oh, well, not in my background, because I hate all this construction stuff and stuff that's going on. Octopus Energy turn around and go, there you go. we'll compensate you. Hey, if it gets good green infrastructure built, it's a small price to pay. Then he continues. A huge amount of planning policy, and it's section 106, the community infrastructure levy, is about compensating people for the impacts of development. But there is wide agreement that it needs to be better, more targeted, and more promptly delivered, except, of course, if you're Simon Jenkins. Can't agree more. If we are going to build big infrastructure projects, if we are going to build good green infrastructure, then we will have to accept that there are people who are not going to be happy about it. But tell you what, that grumbling will probably quiet down if you go, okay, well, here's a bit of compensation for you to remunerate you for that. Hey, if it gets good green infrastructure built, hey, I'm all for that. Second paragraph. Just a couple of small errors. First, Cameron's policy was avowedly localist. Second, people in the actual housing estates now get to vote on whether they're regenerated, which they generally endorse by North Korea style margins. Which, again, one of the things they want is true. One of the things that they want about these housing estates is that people do want them to be regenerated. They want to see more stuff. You know, we talk about the 15-minute cities. I've stated this before. It's the first time ever in a long, long time the UK has ever considered, actual town and city planning. Imagine being able to just say, oh, that's only 15 minutes away. That's only 15 minutes away. That's only 15 minutes away. It brings more jobs to a local area because, of course, more local amenities will mean more local jobs, etc., etc. It will be a massive boon to these types of things. It's the first time we've ever really thought about this type of planning, and yet so many people think that it's not. And of course, people do overwhelmingly vote for these things. They, as they said, vote for it in North Korea style margins. But Robert continues. So, unless you're describing any kind of housing as housing estates, in which case is fine. But obviously, they are not forced on local people, except in the sense they are asking every area to build its share with control of how that building happens. And that, I think, is really important. Asking local people, giving them more input about how this building happens, how they build this stuff is really, really important. Giving people more control over local say of what happens. People know they need more housing, that how it happens and the way that it happens, local people now get a say. It's not just a developer who just buys the land and just gets to do what they want. I think that is a very good thing going forward. Robert continues again. So next paragraph saying, no green belts were an explicit policy of urban commitment, not to protect the nice land. This is something you've repeatedly complained about. Also, all the polling shows that large majorities think that wind turbines are pretty useful and want more of them. Can't disagree with that. Everyone wants more green energy, more green turbines. It will be fantastic. But he continues again. So the impact of the policies that you are describing has been to cripple growth, productivity, and opportunity. London is horrendously undense compared to its equivalent cities, and no prettier for it. You've predicted, you've protected the quote historic character of Hounslow and prevented more Marleybones. It costs more money, and of course, this is of course talking about Simon's talking about trying to protect, these areas. What we've really got to do is we've got to declutter, shall we say, the cities or de-densify the cities. And as Robert points out, no more area has been de-densed than London. And all it's done is spread the urban sprawl. I've often said that we've got to look at how we do building, that we've got to build up and out rather than out and out. Now, there is still that element of, yes, we've got to build out because, that's where most of the land tends to be, but there's no problem with building up. And I think that's what we've got to look more into, and how we can build these big new apartment blocks, building blocks of the future. And there are a lot of really good ways and green ways really to do that. But apparently not according to Simon Jenkins, which is a bit disappointing, but there you go. And then he gets onto cables. this was one of the bizarre points Simon has in his thing, which Robert points out. So Robert goes, "It costs more money to bury cables, Simon. A massive amount more. That's the whole point of trying to incentivize people to approve not burying them." You know, he complains about, oh, well, if you have all these wind turbines, that means you can have all these more pylons. Oh, if we could only bury them. Burying them costs so much more money. So that's why you've got to incentivize people to do it. You know, there's a housing estate not too far from me, and in someone's garden, they actually have a massive pylon in their garden. I don't know if they get any compensation for it or anything like that, but who knows? Maybe one day I should just go knock on the door and ask. It'd be very worth asking just to see. So far, most of this has just been differences of opinion. The next section is where the hypocrisy really kicks in. Right, more houses are always needed. Great point. But you don't know who's argued with it. You repeatedly, of course, pointing out that Simon Jenkins has in the past continuously argued against building more houses. Again, back to Robert. You've repeatedly argued that we do not, in fact, have a housing shortage, just a housing miscalculation. In fact, you did so in your last column of yours that I went through, which was in the most memorable words of Anya Martin, had more factual errors than sentences. And this is someone who, this is the argument, one of the things you've seen against building more housing, that, oh, actually, we have the houses, we don't need to build anymore. It's just a complete, miscalculation of the numbers. They've got the numbers wrong. The reality is that, we need to, unleash those houses, give them more, but it doesn't really add up. Certainly on that. And of course, Simon goes on to talk about land banking, which Robert comes back with. The land banking thing is a straightforward myth, popular amongst people who do not understand how the planning system works or how grueling a process it is to get the permissions. See this excellent piece. Digging deeper, the unbuilt planning permissions. Again, interesting piece on that. Policy should be aimed at de-densifying cities. But who opposed that? You, just 3 paragraphs ago, in this bit about the urban conservation areas protecting the historic character of British towns. Again, one of the things that Labour has proposed, along with Rachel Reeves, is saying that local people should have more of a say in how their planning goes. That's fine. I am all for that, because at the end of the day, when you poll people, they do admit we need more housing, we need more stuff like this. It will bring a benefit to the area. We are all for it. Just let them have more of a say in how this stuff happens. So he continues. So Robert Coase quotes him, sort of easing the conversation from commercial to residential use. This is a good idea. We did a great paper on it, which he points to. And you know who's opposed it? You, in your last column, just the last month, complaining about the destruction of our high streets. Yeah, he absolutely did. On that, he absolutely did. On that, I know because I went over it myself. Saying that, when you look at high streets, you look at a lot of the units that are identified for sort of business use, so they can't be residentialized. But at the end of the day, if you turn them into residential units, you lose all kinds of potential opportunities. You talk big examples, of course, being the Crooked Inn recently, definitely a victim of that happening recently. there's all kinds of stuff that really needs to be done. This planning sector is something that really needs to be thought out, and I'm really glad that Labour are willing to have a fight on this. Oh, and I see Labour is dead is trending. Gee, I wonder why that's trending. Uh, Robert Colvile, promoting the rental sector. At least you've got consent on this one. You've always said it should be more like Germany, but do you know who doesn't agree? An overwhelming population of the British public who want to own their own homes. Again, we need to have a really fundamental conversation about our rental sector here in the UK. It's something we really, really need to tackle. Going towards the more German style of stuff would be fantastic. But if you talk to most people in the UK, they don't want to be forever renters. Now, in Germany, because they've sorted out, people are fine with that. That's how a lot of people do live their entire lives. The rent agreement can pass from one generation to the next in Germany. Can't here. Again, like I say, Germany's different, is vastly different. Something that we should take a lot of look at. And I've said before, if it works in another country, why can't we borrow it? But I do agree with Robert. The vast, overwhelming people of UK population wants to own their own home. So we should, as a government, make sure that we can provide that. But I also agree, we also need to look at renting as well. We need to really look at renting desperately. But anyway, Robert continues, and indeed, the public is pretty much every other country, bar Germany, which is why we have the 5th lowest home ownership rate in the EU. Oh, also supporting the rental sector might mean building more rental properties. Again, very true. Easing downsizing, good idea. You're right that cutting stamp duty would help. But then we have 10 times less retirement housing as a proportion of the housing stock than either Australia or the US. So there's nowhere for people to downsize to unless we build more. Yeah, we've always said, if you want to solve the housing situation in the UK, we have to build. That is an undeniable truth, but that isn't it. We do really have to look at the renting sector. I really do believe that is a fundamental sector we have to look at. And then, of course, Robert finishes. So here's your conclusion. After another swipe at Cameron, you concede that the answer is zoning to separate the good land, which should be preserved in aspic, and the bad land that can be built on, which, based on your previous pieces, means somewhere in the north. You know who else had this idea to base a British planning system around zoning? Robert Jerrick. And you know who opposed his plans? Oh, I think we can all guess. Again, here's Simon Jenkins opposing the very things he's just suggested. However, in your defense, you did say there is a virtue in the white paper's concept of zoning for different degrees of development after about 700 words of kicking the absolute crap out of it. In conclusion, there is a simple way to explain the massive inconsistencies and omissions in Simon articles when it comes to housing. It is to assume that he doesn't want any new houses built, which is the reasoning backwards from that point. In particular, we all suggest sensible alternatives to the policy of the day, but when are actually adopted as policy, he will oppose them too, or even as with commercial to residential, both at the same time. In the meantime, well done to Rachel Reeves. At least in the area of housing policy, you can be entirely sure you're making the right enemies. So yeah, that's just an interesting piece. I thought I'd point you towards, because it's always interesting to see. Very much so. For every person that gets in to the Guardian, there's very often an expert, be them on Twitter, on blogs, or anywhere else, who goes, actually, this guy's written an absolute awful piece. Um, but yeah, I do go recommend, like I say, checking him out. To be honest, um, he does talk about again a lot of the problems with housing and planning and stuff, how it needs to be sorted out. It'd be a very interesting guest to want us to get on here in the future to have a talk about this, talk about what his policy proposals would be. But yes, we will see what happens in the future. But nonetheless, I thought that was kind of an interesting rebuttal that you don't often see to someone like Simon Jenkins, pointing out that, yeah, when it comes to housing, um, he does have a bit of hypocrisy um, on this when it comes to this. Because even I noticed, you know, he supports some things and then he'll write an article maybe a couple of months later and goes, yeah, no, I don't support that. Or I did support that, but no, I don't. And there's a bit of, confusion on that. But no, nevertheless, I think it's a good rebuttal to Simon Jenkins. And to be honest, I do agree. Good job to Angela Rayner. Not Angela Rayner, Rachel Reeves. Sorry, get the name with the right person. Good job to Rachel Reeves. She's done, to be honest, I think a very good job with that announcement. And as I've said before, I look forward to her to being Chancellor. I think there is a lot of good stuff that she will do alongside Ed Miliband. And like I say, I look forward to that when that starts to happen. So, yeah, again, good stuff to look forward to be honest. So, as always, thank you very much, of course, for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.